It is 9 in the morning, and a man is being nailed to a piece of wood on a hill outside the city wall. Or standing close enough to hear the hammer, close enough to see muscles in his shoulders seize as they stretch his arms along the beam. The sky is clear. The smell is iron and dust and sweat. Around you, a crowd has gathered the way crowds always gather around someone else's worst day. Half horrified, half unable to look away. His name is Jesus. He is a carpenter from a town called Nazareth, somewhere in his early 30s, and by every account he has had no sleep, no food, and no mercy for almost a full day. They have already beaten him. They have already torn his back open. Now they lift the beam, and they drop it into place, and his full weight comes down on 2 iron spikes. And here is the thing almost nobody tells you about a cross. A cross does not kill you the way you think it does. It kills you by stealing your breath. When the body hangs from outstretched arms, the chest is pulled into a fixed, open position. Pulling air in is easy. Pushing it back out is almost impossible, unless the dying man shoves himself upward, lifting his entire body weight on the nails through his feet, just long enough to empty his lungs. Then he sinks back down, and the clock starts again. That means every breath is a decision. Every exhale is a small, screaming act of will. Now hold that in your mind. Because over the next 6 hours, this man does not just breathe. He speaks. 7 separate times he climbs his own dying body to find the air for words. 7 times, when the easiest thing in the universe would be to stay silent and let the dark come, he chooses to spend a breath on a sentence. And the very last breath he spends, the final one, he does not lose. He aims it. We will get to that. But not yet. Most people can name maybe one of the things Jesus said from the cross. 2 if they grew up in church. But there are 7. And when you put them in order, the actual order he said them, they stop being 7 random quotes. They become something else. A sequence. A descent. And then, at the bottom, a turn. This is not a story about a religion. This is not a story about a painting you have seen 100 times. This is not a story about a man dying quietly and beautifully the way the movies show it. This is a story about the last 7 things a person said while suffocating, and how, somehow, almost none of them were about himself. Stay with me, because the first word out of his mouth is the one that should have been impossible. The first words are not a scream. They are not a curse. They are a prayer for the men holding the hammers. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Sit with how strange that is. The nails are still going in. The soldiers are still working. And the first breath this man chooses to spend, the first time he hauls his torn body upward to force air past his lips, he uses it to ask his father not to hold this against the very men driving the iron through his wrists. You have to understand who these men were. They were a Roman execution detail. This was their job. They had done it 100 times, and they would do it 100 more. And right now, at the foot of the cross, they were not even watching him die. They were on the ground, throwing dice. There was a custom that the execution squad kept the condemned man's clothing, and Jesus had one decent garment, a seamless robe woven in one piece, too good to tear into shares. So they gambled for it. While he hung above them, naked and dying, they played a game for his last possession. And he looked down at the men gambling for his clothes and asked God to forgive them. Here is where I want you to stop and do something uncomfortable. Think of the person you are still refusing to forgive. The one whose name still tightens something in your chest. Now measure their offense against this. A man forgiving the people in the act of killing him while they kill him. Almost everything we hold on to looks very small next to that. Forgiveness, it turns out, is not something you feel. It is something you decide, often before the other person has stopped hurting you, and sometimes before they have even said sorry. He proved that in the first sentence. But watch what happens next, because the second word goes somewhere even stranger. There were 3 crosses on that hill that morning. Jesus in the middle, and on either side of him 2 criminals. Real ones. Men condemned for actual crimes. And one of them, even while dying, joined the crowd mocking Jesus, spitting insults sideways through his own pain. The other one didn't. Tradition gives this second man a name, Dismas. We don't know much about him. We know he was guilty, he says so himself. We know he had hours, at most, left to live. And we know that somewhere, in those hours, watching the man in the middle absorb mockery without returning it, something in him broke open. He turned his head, which on a cross costs you a breath, and he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." It was the smallest possible request. Not save me, not take me down, just remember me. Don't let me vanish completely. And Jesus answered him with a second sentence. "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." That word, paradise, is worth slowing down on. In the original Greek, it is paradisos, and it wasn't originally a religious word at all. It came from Old Persian, and it meant a walled royal garden, the private, green, protected garden of a king. So picture what Jesus is actually saying to a convicted criminal in the last hour of his life. Not "you'll be tolerated," not "you'll squeak in." You will walk with me into the king's own garden. Today, here is what I don't want you to miss. Of all the people on that hill, the religious leaders, the loyal followers, the soldiers, the first human being Jesus personally promises paradise to is a guilty man with a criminal record and no time left to fix anything. Nobody is too far gone. Nobody is too late. The man who had nothing left to offer but a single sentence got a garden. And the lesson underneath it is one you can carry whether or not you believe a word of the theology. The people the world has written off completely are almost never as finished as the world thinks they are, including maybe the one you've written off in your own life, including maybe you. 2 sentences in, 2 acts of mercy, both spent on other people, both bought with breath he could barely afford. Pay attention to this, because it's about to cost him more than breath. So far the pattern is almost unbearable when you notice it. A man is suffocating to death, and he keeps spending his breath on everyone but himself. Forgiveness for his executioners. A garden for a criminal. Not one word yet about his own pain. If this is already hitting you differently than you expected. If you're starting to hear these words you thought you knew, do me a quick favor and subscribe. This channel walks through the parts of these stories most people skim right past, and I'd love for you to be here for the next one. And while you're at it, I'm going to ask you a question at the very end of this video. Start thinking about your answer now. Of these 7 last words, which one is going to land hardest on you? Because the next 3 are where it gets hard. The third sentence is the one that breaks people, because it's not spoken to God, and it's not spoken to a stranger. It's spoken to his mother. She is standing at the foot of the cross. Her name is Mary. 30-odd years ago, she held this same body as an infant, wrapped him, fed him, watched him take his first steps across a dirt floor in Nazareth. And now she is watching him die naked in front of a crowd. And there is nothing she can do. There is no pain a parent can imagine worse than this. Outliving your child is bad enough. Watching it happen, slowly, in public, while you stand close enough to touch his feet and can only watch. There is no word for that in any language. Near her stands a young man, John, the only one of his closest friends who didn't run. The others scattered when the soldiers came. This one stayed. And Jesus, lifting himself one more agonizing time to speak, does not use the breath to say goodbye to his mother. He uses it to make sure she will be taken care of after he's gone. He looks at her and says, "Woman, behold your son." Then he looks at John and says, "Behold your mother." In 2 short phrases, he gives his mother a new son and gives his friend a new mother. He builds her a family before he leaves, so she won't be alone. Think about the weight of that. He is in the worst physical agony a human body can experience, and his mind is on the logistics of someone else's loneliness. That's the lesson here, and you don't need to share his faith to feel it. Love, the real kind, shows up most clearly, not when it's easy, but when you have every excuse to think only of yourself. And choose not to. Who in your life have you stopped showing up for because your own life got hard? He had a better excuse than any of us will ever have. He showed up anyway. But now the sky changes. The accounts say that at noon, the brightest part of the day, darkness fell over the whole land, and it stayed for 3 hours. We don't get a tidy explanation. We just get the dark. And out of that dark, around 3 in the afternoon, comes the 4th sentence. And it is the one that should unsettle you, because it doesn't sound like the others at all. He cries out, and for the only time in any of these final words, he doesn't speak the common language of the crowd. He reverts to his mother tongue, the Aramaic he would have learned as a child. Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me? That word sabachthani means abandoned, deserted, left behind. It is the rawest syllable in the entire account, and it's no accident that it comes out in the language of his childhood. When pain goes deep enough, people don't reach for their public voice. They reach for the words their mother taught them. This is a man at the absolute bottom, and he is not performing strength. He is naming the worst feeling a human being can have, the sense that even God is gone. Here is what I want you to hold on to, especially if you have ever felt that exact thing. He said it out loud. He did not pretend to be fine. The strongest figure in this entire story looked into the void and admitted he felt utterly alone. And that admission is in the record forever. So if you have ever sat in the dark, convinced that you'd been abandoned, that nobody was coming, that even heaven had gone silent, you are not weak for feeling it, and you are not the first. The feeling of being forsaken is not a failure of faith. It's a part of being human that even he didn't skip. There's something else buried in that cry, and most people miss it. He wasn't inventing those words. He was quoting. They are the opening line of an old song, the 22nd Psalm, and anyone in that crowd who knew their scripture would have known how that song begins in despair, but doesn't end there. It ends in rescue, in vindication, in a promise that stretches to people not yet born. By quoting the first line, he was pointing at the whole thing. Even at the bottom, he was reaching for the part that hadn't happened yet. Now, before we go further, it's worth pausing on a question some people ask. Did any of this actually happen? Or is it just a story the church tells about itself? It's a fair question. And the answer is that this is one of the better documented executions in the ancient world. The Roman historian Tacitus, no friend of Christianity, writing decades later for a Roman audience, recorded plainly that a man called Christus had been executed under the governor Pontius Pilate during the reign of Tiberius, a hostile outside source with no reason to flatter, confirming the basic fact. This man lived, and Rome killed him. We are not standing in a myth. We are standing under a real cross. Which brings us to the 5th sentence, the shortest, the most human, and in some ways the most surprising of them all. I thirst. That's it. 2 words. After everything, the cosmic darkness, the cry of abandonment, the weight of the whole world supposedly on his shoulders. What comes next is just a man's cracked, dry throat, asking for something to drink. The one who, the story says, made the oceans is asking for a sip of water. And there's a quiet detail that fulfills another line from the olden songs. The prediction that they would give him sour wine for his thirst. Someone soaks a sponge in cheap, vinegary wine, sticks it on a stalk, and lifts it to his lips. But underneath the prophecy is something simpler and braver. The 5th word is the moment the strongest person in the story admits he needs help. He had spent 4 sentences giving forgiveness, paradise, family, even his own anguish poured out honestly. And now finally he asks to receive. There is a strange permission in that for the rest of us. If he could say, I thirst out loud, if he could admit a need without shame, then so can you. Real strength was never about needing nothing. It was about being honest about what you need. 5 words spoken, 2 left. And the next one is the one this entire video has been building toward. To get to that hill, someone had to carry the cross. Jesus, beaten through the night, couldn't bear the weight of the beam himself, so the soldiers grabbed a man out of the crowd. A passerby named Simon, from Cyrene in North Africa, in town for the festival. He He had nothing to do with any of this. He just happened to be there. And he ended up carrying the very wood his city's visitor would die on. Remember him. A stranger, pulled in off the road, who shouldered a weight that wasn't his to carry. Hold that picture for one more minute. Because now we come to the sixth word. And after everything, the forgiveness, the garden, the mother, the darkness, the thirst, the sixth word is not a complaint. It is not a question. It is not a goodbye. It is a verdict. It is finished. In English, that sounds like surrender. Like a man at the end of his rope saying, "I'm done. I can't anymore." But it wasn't English. It was Greek, and it was a single word, tetelestai. And tetelestai did not mean, "I give up." It was the word a merchant stamped across the bottom of a bill once the last coin had been paid. It meant completed, settled, paid in full. Nothing left owing. Archaeologists have actually dug up old receipts from that world with this exact word written across them, tetelestai, the ancient equivalent of stamping an invoice, PID. So when this man, with almost no breath left, pushed himself up one final time to force out a single word, the word he chose wasn't the cry of someone being crushed by a debt. It was the shout of someone announcing a debt had just been cleared. Whatever he believed he came to do, it was done. Complete. Finished. The way a masterpiece is finished, not the way a candle is finished. And here is where I keep a promise I made you at the very beginning. I told you a man dying this way should not have been able to speak at all, that every word cost him a full body climb up the nails just to find the air. I told you to watch his last breath, because he wouldn't lose it. He'd aim it. Now you can see it. He does not run out of breath. The accounts are very specific and very strange about this. They don't say he died and the words trailed off. They say he cried out, "It is finished." And then, with whatever was left, he said one more thing, and then he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. He chose the moment. He spent his second-to-last breath, declaring the job complete, and his very last breath he handed over on purpose. He didn't fade out. He set it down. And that seventh and final word, the last thing he ever said, was this: "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." Those words weren't new either. They were a line from another old psalm, and more than that, they were the bedtime prayer Jewish mothers taught their children. It was the verse a little kid would whisper before falling asleep in the dark, trusting that the morning would come. The last sentence this man spoke on earth was a child's prayer for falling asleep safely. After the darkness, after the abandonment, after the whole weight of it, he closed his eyes the way a trusting child closes his eyes at night. This is not the death of someone whose plans collapsed. This is not the death of a victim who lost control. This is not the death of a man surprised by his own ending. This is the death of someone who finished what he started, said his prayers, and let go on his own terms. There was a Roman officer standing guard, a centurion who had almost certainly overseen executions before, who knew exactly what a dying man was supposed to look like. And he had just watched this one forgive, provide, refuse to curse, and surrender in peace. The accounts say he looked up at the cross and said, "Surely this man was the Son of God." Whatever you believe about that claim, sit with what it took to pull it out of a hardened soldier. He had never seen anyone die like that, and maybe that's the part that reaches across 2,000 years and touches something in your own life directly. Because all of us eventually come to the edge of something, a loss, an ending, a goodbye we didn't choose. We've all sat by a bed or dreaded the one coming, and the question that hangs over every one of those moments is the same. When it's your turn to let go of something, will you go down clawing and cursing? Or will you be able to set it down, say it's finished, and trust the morning? He showed us it's possible to face the worst thing imaginable and still choose peace over panic. That's not a religious idea. That's a way to die and a way to live. 7 words. The last one, a child's prayer. And then it was quiet on the hill. So let me leave you with 3 things to carry out of this. First, the order matters. Look at where he started and where he ended. He started with forgiveness. for the men still hammering, and he ended with surrender. A child's prayer, eyes closed, trusting the dark. Between those two bookends, he gave away a garden, built his mother a family, named his own abandonment out loud, and admitted he was thirsty. 7 sentences, and almost every single one was spent on someone other than himself. That's not how dying men usually talk. Last words are normally about the person dying. His were mostly about everyone else. Second, and this one is personal. At least one of those 7 words was spoken with you in mind. Maybe it's the forgiveness if you're carrying something you can't seem to put down. Maybe it's today you will be with me, if some part of you is convinced you're too far gone. Maybe it's the cry of abandonment if you're sitting in the dark right now, wondering if anyone is coming. These weren't just things he said. They were things he said into the exact kind of moment you might be living in. And third, the one I most want you to take with you, "It is finished," was not the sound of a life running out. It was the sound of a job being completed. He didn't die because they finally broke him. He finished and then he let go. And the invitation hidden in that, whatever you believe, is enormous. You don't have to claw and grasp your way through every ending. There is another way to face the hard things. You can do the work, say it's finished, and set it down in peace. So here's my question for you, and I really do want your answer. Of these 7 last words, forgiveness, paradise, family, the cry in the dark, the thirst, it is finished, and the child's prayer, which one landed hardest on you? Tell me in the comments. I read them. He climbed his own body 7 times to speak. The least we can do is listen.